Hi, this is Life Master Kevin Noren again with another game. And this game is a little bit longer than typically for one of these videos, but there's a good chance you're cooped up inside anyway, so what have you got that's better to do? So stick around and watch this game. Now this game is between Vera Menchik, who was the very first women's world champion, and she also held the title for 17 years, which is longer than anybody else had. And her day was mainly in the 20s and the 30s, and she beat a lot of good players in her day. And this game, in fact, was played in Hastings, England in 1931. Now, she's white. The player of the black pieces is none other than Jose Capablanca, who was the third world chess champion and certainly one of the very greatest chess players of all time. Now, in this game, Vera Menchik plays unusually cautiously. Capablanca is the clear favorite here, and she's adopting a policy that many people do against a higher-rated player, simply trying to swap pieces off the board and get a drawn ending. But we're going to see that that's not so easy. So let's look at this game. So Vera Menchik plays d4. Knight f6, stopping e4 from Capablanca. Knight f3. It's a somewhat sharper to play c4 to try to grab that center more. Capablanca plays b6. The knight controls the e4 square, and he's going to get another piece on there and keep white from getting a big center for nothing. And white plays this modest form of development with e3. It's sometimes called the Kali system, after a guy named Kali. It's a solid little development, and white will play his pieces knight to d2 and castle and try to get an e4, and surprisingly he gets attacking chances sometimes. But it's a solid, modest development. So Capablanca continues a bishop to b7, bishop d3, and now he plays c5, making his first play for the center. White castles, black develops another piece, knight c6, and he's thinking about things like knight to b4. White wants to stop that and plays a natural move, just supporting the center with c3. Now Capablanca continues his development with e6, and now this is the theme of this game begins right here. Now there's a number of good moves here for white. White could play here, queen to e2. He could play knight to d2 with the idea of playing e4. Instead, Vera Menchik plays knight to e5. Now that is kind of strange, moving a piece a second time. She's got a solid position, and apparently she just hopes to get a drawn or an even game with Capablanca by swapping pieces off. Well, Capablanca takes this in stride, and he doesn't worry about this and just plays d6, practically forcing it anyway. So the knight takes, the bishop takes, queen to e2, bishop to e7, normal developing move. And now I've got this game annotated by a number of different sources, and one author, Harry Golombek, in his book Capablanca's 100 Best Games, calls this move, which Menchik played, a natural move, and I don't agree with that. It's just a wrong move. I mean, why not simply play here? She's moving a piece a second time. It's clear that she's following this policy of just trying to swap pieces. But the problem is black is gaining. Black protects with queen to d7, and after these exchanges, black makes a little bitty gains here and there. Now white can't play e4. Black's got pieces stopping it. Black's development is complete. He's ready to castle. And white, correct me if I'm wrong, but white had the first move in this game, right? And yet white is behind in development. That means you're doing something wrong. So now Menchik tries to play catch-up with knight to d2, developing a piece. Black castles, all very normal. Now because white is so far behind in development, he can't play the normal-looking e4 move to get the center because black simply takes on d4. Black has, he can put a rook on the file. He can put his queen to c2 immediately. But the point is that black has absolute command of this open file, and later on he might even play the move d5, and then if black pushes or white pushes, the knight comes here where you got like a French defense pawn formation, but these two pawns are in the same color squares as bishop, and in the French defense, black usually has a white square bishop that's hemmed in by these pawns. This is not a good position for white. So what Menchik does instead is take this pawn on c5. And now, this is another interesting situation. And I think a lot of players would like to take with a b pawn, and I think that black has a slight but definite advantage in this position because black has more center pawns, very compact, solid center that keeps white pieces out of the center. Black is quite a bit ahead in development, and this open b file can be useful. However, Capablanca took with a d pawn. So now there's an open d file, and we have a fairly symmetrical pawn formation. And a lot of times a higher rated player wouldn't really care for this because they want to keep things out of balance, to mix things up more. But Capablanca plays this game serenely, like nothing's going on. Go ahead, exchange your pieces. So he takes like that. Now, Menchik has to get untangle these pieces right here and plays e4 in order to get this knight out and then get the bishop out. Of course, if the knight were to move on the next move, this is hanging. But anyway, black puts a rook on the open file. That doesn't even need an explanation. Just the most natural move on the board. Now, white can't move the knight because black's got two pieces on this pawn. So she plays e5. The trouble is it's putting yet another pawn on the same color square as this bishop. Now, I remember even reading as a beginner in a book by Capablanca, of all people, that don't put your pawns on the same color square as your bishop. Now, like all these rules, doesn't apply every single time, but that's usually really good advice. So Capablanca brings the knight to d5, nice center square, and white continues to try to get her pieces out. Look at how easy black's game just develops. Rook to d7, preparing to double. White is still anxious to try to get pieces off the board. She hopes to like swap all those rooks off down the d file and swap more pieces until she gets that cherished drawn ending. So after rook to d1, Capablanca doubles, and now she's got to get this bishop out. If she plays it to e3, then black can take it. Now, white can't take this knight with the queen because, well, that would hang the rook on d1 to these two guys down here. And taking with a pawn, well, that's just a horrible pawn formation. So white would have to play rook takes, but then black can play queen takes. And after queen takes knight, black has complete control of this open file. White can't get a rook to this file. I don't know that I would say that this game is winning for black, but it's a very good position for black. So Vera Menchik decides to develop her bishop to d2. Pretty modest. And now at this point, this is one of the most critical moves in the entire game. Capablanca plays b5. And what he's going to do is this file isn't going to open by itself. In order to use these rooks, he's got to get his knight out of the way. He's also controlling this square and getting ready to get this knight out of the way. So now Vera Menchik plays king to f1. When you get a situation where you've got one open center file and you want to get those rooks off the board, you got to move your king over, and then hopefully the king will protect the last rook as it gets swapped off the board. So Capablanca plays knight to b6, finally opening up that file. And this is a potentially nice square for the knight on c4 there. So now Vera Menchik wants to continue her policy with the exchanging of pieces and plays bishop to f4. And now this is another interesting decision by Capablanca. He's got that file. So in order to prevent any ghost of a chance of a back rank mate, he plays h6, because there's nothing really that great white can do here. So that's just a good precautionary move. White continues with her plan of swapping the pieces. Very consistent, I gotta say that. Incidentally, yeah, queen takes might have been okay too. I think that's a good move, but he played with the rook. And now this is where a crucial mistake gets made. Now, it's interesting. I've got this game annotated by Irving Chernev, whose books I like. But when it comes to Capablanca, he's kind of a hero worshiper, and he doesn't always give the best defenses of Capablanca's opponents when he annotates their games. Because she should have played b3 or something, but at any rate, she just continues that same plan of swapping pieces, and her position is getting a little more difficult. Black has been more active, and Black has had an initiative this entire game. And this kind of thing adds up. And usually when your position is getting difficult, that's when you start to make little mistakes. And she just made one. Takes, she got her way, and now comes queen to e4. That threatens the bishop, and it also threatens to come to c4 check and win the a pawn. So she moved her bishop back to g3. It's safe there. It's not doing a whole lot though. You know, this pawn is just kind of in its way. So here comes the check. Queen to e2. Now, if he takes the pawn, then the b5 pawn goes. But Capablanca is going to win a pawn here. Takes, check, force, and now we've got knight to a4. This is a common device with a knight. You attack these two pawns, you move one, you lose the other. There's no way that white can avoid losing that pawn. So, in the meantime, at least white tries to get the king into play. Black grabs the pawn. King attacks the knight. Knight goes to c4. A beautiful square. It's a hole. A square where white can't dislodge it with a pawn. And white does want to get rid of this knight and exchanges off the knight. And then there's going to be just two minor pieces left on the board. And now we've reached a bishop ending where Capablanca has the better bishop because this pawn is in the way. These squares are both kind of weak, but a pawn up. Can this game be won? How do you go about winning it? What would you do in this position? I'm sure everybody viewing thought about this move. c4. Very simple. It just puts a pawn. These pawns, in order to win, this is where Black's extra pawn is. He's got to make an advance on this side. So Black also puts a pawn on a light square, which gives his bishop nice mobility. As a matter of fact, as I said before, Capablanca said this himself. Put your pawns on the opposite color square as your bishops, because they just get in the way if you do otherwise. So after this move, c4, now, well, this isn't doing much, so she tries to get that back into play with bishop to f4. And now, Capablanca makes, this is an interesting point right here. Capablanca makes this move a6 because he's reasoning that sooner or later you might have to protect this pawn. But there's an interesting trap here. A lot of players, I think, would have jumped at bishop to g5, getting the last piece, minor piece, off the board. And then what could be simpler than to win a king and pawn ending, a king, a pawn ahead. But watch what happens after this. We take, and now what's going to happen is king here, king up, here. We see that the white king is running after these black pawns. King here, hitting the b5 pawn, a6, and now here's a really trappy situation. If white runs in there with king to b6, that just loses to b4. And if you study this position a little bit, you'll see that black is going to get a queen. But instead, white plays a3, stopping that. And now there's a serious menace of winning these pawns. As a matter of fact, I've got one book that says that this position is unclear, but I looked at this position with the very strong computer engine Stockfish 10, and Stockfish claims that white is winning here. And why would that be? Well, sooner or later, black can put this king here. White, because of white's advanced king, he can win this even being a pawn down, because I'm not going to go into every detailed variation here, but what will happen is white will be able to run black out of pawn moves on the king side. Then sooner or later, the black king will have to give way and let the white king in either to b6 or d6 and run after some pawns. Again, we won't go through every little detail in this, but that's a trap that Capablanca could have fallen for, and a lot of players probably would have. So coming back to this position, Capablanca had played his pawn to a6. Now, Menchik puts her bishop on a better square because it's not doing anything. It's not really doing much of anything this entire game. So bishop to e3. I don't think I need to explain that Capablanca is going to bring his king into the game. What else is there to do? King to f8, bishop to b6. If you got a better idea, tell me. The king comes out, both kings come up to engage. King to d4, king to c6, also gaining time, hitting the bishop. Now, what are we going to do with that bishop? There's only two squares. These squares are covered. You got bishop a7, bishop a5. Well, bishop to a5 simply loses to bishop c5 check. The king goes out of the way, and we win yet another pawn, making the win still easier. Now, that leaves bishop to a7. So, and here's another nice move. Now, in order to make progress on the queen side, what Capablanca is going to do is put white in zugzwang to get white in a situation where there's just no decent moves. And he starts out with this, f5. Incidentally, putting another pawn in the opposite color square of his bishop. Now, if white takes this en passant, we take with the bishop check. King has to get out of the way, and we win yet another pawn. So, after f5, that's just out of the question. Now, there really just isn't any good move here. White, eventually, white's just going to run out of moves. What is there? I mean, if f4, we just play g6, and sooner or later, this bishop will have to move, and then we can get these pawns going. But let's see what actually happened. So, she played a4. This is just desperate, because there's no other good moves here. So after a4, Capablanca just ignores it, plays g6. Like I said, he's just going to run this position out, white out of good moves, and then he's going to be able to advance finally. Sooner or later, this king is going to have to give way. So f4, h5, yet another pawn on the light square, and takes. I mean, there's just no good move here. I mean, black is sooner or later going to take that, and then he's got this dangerous passed a pawn. So she takes. Capablanca takes with the king, giving him a nice passed a pawn, and g3. It's almost over. g3, a5, getting that pawn going. Passed pawns must be pushed. There's no good moves here. Bishop checks, forcing the bishops off. And then after the exchange of bishops, she just resigned. This is very easy to win. So after the exchange, black's got this extra a pawn. White can't get too far away from this a pawn, and that will enable black to come in on the king side or get this pawn. You can work out the details yourself, but the interesting feature of this game is that Vera Menchik, in trying too hard to get a draw with Capablanca, was not playing objectively correct chess. She was playing a plan that was not based on the needs of the position, but rather just the desire to get a draw with Capablanca. And it didn't work. All these little exchanges helped Capablanca out. Interestingly, when you look at this game in hindsight, it looks like Capablanca didn't do a thing. What did he do? He brought his pieces out. He doubled his rooks on a file. But remember that key move B5. That was a real subtle positional move. But other than that, it almost looked like Capablanca did nothing, and Vera Menchik, with her policy of exchanging pieces, improved the pieces of Capablanca, and it's like she beat herself. And that's our game.